Greetings and welcome back to another Perspectives. It's been a while since I've had a Perspectives, and there's no reason for that except that nothing really crept across my radar. Because a few days ago I was chatting with some friends of mine, and I was saying that I'm very conscious and aware of not wanting to um, put more stuff out there into the internet world than is necessary, because there's already an overwhelming amount of content and things online. And I have this um, kind of personal question whereby I wish to share some thoughts and material and content online, to share it with other people and to engage in this correspondence and this conversation. But at the same time, I'm very wary that we should not be overwhelming ourselves with information. And so I don't have the need, nor do I want to have the compulsion to think that I have to put something out every week, such as in Perspectives. If I have a series of readings, I'll put them out, but not to be consistent for the sake of consistency. And because we have to make sure that we're not falling into the trap of feeling the need to be part of this whole wave of information. And that kind of coincided with the quartet chat that I had recently, the last one that just came out, whereby we were asked about our sources. Where do we get any information from? And I said, which was quite true, that I've really stepped back from the internet in recent times, and I don't really follow, anything religiously or and I try to balance my day. So I do checking of news in the morning, and then I spend the rest of the morning on my own research and reading. And at dinner time at 6 o'clock, I close down the computer, and I generally have computer-free evenings, most every evening. So it's important to have that balance because, I think we really do need to create our environment. And our environment, especially our home environment, creates our energetic state. And we should be very careful of what we put into our bodies, not just food, but information, of course. And with information and with thoughts comes the frequency and vibration that are aligned with that. And frequencies and vibration are also food for the body. So we should be mindful of that and how we create our environment. And what I've been particularly aware of, or what's on my radar, again in recent times, is that there's a lot of what I call false dichotomy out there in the internet world, or in the world in general. Is that just because something is speaking against something else, it doesn't make it a genuine polarity. Often they call these false oppositions. And that in recent years, with this whole uptake of social media and alternative media, as they call it, there's this, I think it's quite simplistic to have an idea that the mainstream media, which is putting out all the propaganda and generally garbage, if you're an alternative media, then you're putting out the good stuff and the correct stuff. Well, that's not really the case, of course, because both sides have been infiltrated. And there are agendas working through both sides. So we really do need to be mindful to have our filters. Even in the social alternative media, there are manipulations, there's information which has been planted, there are people which have been bought out or corrupted for whatever reason. You have to trust your instinct and filter what comes. And because without that filtering, we are giving less time for ourselves the more time we're putting out into this grabbing of information, etc. And the reason I thought I would do this perspectives this time is because I was just come across some of my own personal reading that seemed to reinforce that. And when things fall across my radar unexpectedly, then they tend to sometimes fall into my perspectives chats. So I was reading, as I often do, I dip into my books randomly and I go back to books and reread them. This is the book I've had on my shelf, dated from 1999, so it's been nearly 25 years now, and it's called Knowing How to Know by Idris Shah. And I opened it and I was reading through an extract which was called Emotion and Primitive State. And I'd like to read an extract here. So in this extract, it says, quote, really primitive man roams about seeking berries and roots to eat. Because he has not yet organized and made more efficient his food gathering program, most of his time is taken up with the search for food. As soon as he learns that he can locate a food supply and live there, or can grow food that he need not eat compulsively, that he needs just enough to survive on, when he discovers these things, he is comparatively free. His life has effectively been lengthened. Instead of spending 69 years gathering food and the equivalent of 1 year in all other activities, he spends, say, 6 years collecting food and has available an extra 63 years for other activities. Modern man is in the same condition where emotion is concerned. He has not yet learned that he has certain emotional needs, has a minimum emotional intake need. If this is fulfilled, it leaves him free to do other things. In the case of emotion, he has an extra 63 years of emotion, which he can employ in enlarging and enriching his perceptions. Improving his perceptions enables him to obtain the knowledge which alone makes it possible for him to solve the mysteries of himself and his situation. Now, that's just an extract, and it's using the idea of primitive man as a food gatherer as an analogy by saying that if you put all your time and effort into this one need and it takes over your whole life, you have no other time for other activities, which means you have no time for your own freedom. If you can fulfill that need, you have more time for your freedom, for yourself, for activities for yourself. Likewise, the modern human being has a need for emotion, has a need to collect information, and of course, to have an emotional satisfaction from that. That's why our mainstream news and is full of emotional content, usually negative. Even the positive news items are generally filled with a kind of tense element or aspect, and perhaps a kind of suffering and negativity into that as well. And of course, our mainstream entertainment, the general crass side of it, is full of emotional saturation, emotional saccharine as well. But we do have a certain need of a certain emotion. So if we can obtain that from, watching a few videos of people we trust, gaining some support, gaining some insight. Once that you've had that emotional feed, then, realize that you've had that emotional feed and you don't need to keep on feeding. That's kind of gorging, greed. And it's very easy to feel I need to go more and more and more. But if we do that, like the analogy here of the food gatherer, if we spend more time trying to fulfill that need, once it's been fulfilled, then we have left time for ourselves. And what is that time for ourselves? Well, coincidentally, as I was reading that knowing how to know, I also dipped into another book that I sometimes dip into, and it's called The Psychology of Man's Possible Evolution by Peter Uspensky. I've got a very tatty first edition 1951 here. And I thought it tied in very nicely with that, so I'm sharing it here. In the opening few pages, the first lecture of this book, Peter Uspensky is talking about psychology. And he says, quote, "Psychology is sometimes called a new science. This is quite wrong. Psychology is perhaps the oldest science, and unfortunately, in its most essential features, a forgotten science. In order to understand how psychology can be defined, it is necessary to realize that psychology, except in modern times, has never existed under its own name. In the ancient times, before philosophy, religion, and art had taken their separate forms as we now know them, psychology had existed in the form of mysteries, such as those of Egypt and ancient Greece. Later, after the disappearance of the mysteries, psychology existed in the form of symbolical teachings. And then he says, and here it is necessary to note that all psychological systems and doctrines, those that exist or existed openly, and those that were hidden or disguised, can be divided into two chief categories. First, systems which study man as they find him, or such as they suppose or imagine him to be. Modern scientific psychology, or what is known under that name, belong to this category. Second, systems which study man not from the point of view of what he is or what he seems to be, but from the point of view of what he may become. That is, from the point of view of his possible evolution. So I think that's relevant also because Peter Uspensky is talking about the psychology that we tend to recognize today as psychology is one which looks at the human being, tries to understand the human being in the world today as he or she is, as the person is. And that's what we tend to think of psychology. But the second kind of category of psychology, or the second form, the one that's existed for antiquity, is the one whereby psychology looks at what the human can become, at the possible evolution of the human. So the reason I'm tying this into the theme of today, which is this overload of information out there and how we have to filter how it's coming. Most information is talking about the situation as it is, about the world as it is, about the human being as it is. And if we are like a hunter-gatherer gathering all this in, then we have less time for our own freedom. And that freedom, I think, connects with what Peter Uspensky says is the second form of psychology, looking at those things, studying ourselves, not as we are, but the potential of what we can become, our possible future evolution. And so there's a difference between putting our time into what we are or what we know ourselves to be, and information which corroborates that and feeds into that, or spending time actually on what we can become, our possible development, growing our soul, and finding those aspects, creating that environment which can feed into growing our soul and our evolution, our development into what we can become. And I think those two streams are very significant because a lot of what's happening in the world is focusing our attention both externally and onto things which are going on now. And so we have so little time to consider who we want to become, how we want to become, what's important for the future. Even if we don't know the future, it's full of potentials. But if we spend, as the analogy said, 63 years gathering food because we're hungry, we don't have many years left to live. We're just feeding ourselves. So we need to make a distinction between that. And I would say that it's critical of in these times that we're in to create our environments, create our lifestyle, how we engage with technology, how we engage with information, how we engage with emotion, but to make time to step back, to put that into one category, the food category, but also to have the time and focus and energy into developmental capacities or whatever feeds our soul. So that was something that came across my radar, and I wanted to join the dots together and share it with you, and take it as you will. Everything, as I say, you take it in, put it through your own filters, see how it feels with you. If it sits with you, if it resonates with you, fine. If it doesn't, fine. We all have to seek our soul stuff in our own way because we each need different types of nutrition. So thanks for listening. As always, stay well, be safe, stay grounded. Until next time, cheers.